So we start for the final session. All of those who are here have much courage to be inside, indoors, with such a wonderful weather outside. So my congratulations. And Professor Avgouleas, please have the floor.
Thank you very much, Admiral Mazarakis. Welcome back, all of you. I know that we stand between you and the wonderful sunshine outside, but we're going to have another very stimulating session. China and Greece promoting regional partnerships in the Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean. The first speaker is Dr. Zuokui, who chaired the previous panel. He's a senior research fellow and director of the Department of Central and Eastern European Studies in the Institute of European Studies at CAS, and the director of the Secretariat Office of the 16+1 Think Tanks Network. He will be followed by Dr. Thanos Dokos, who I'm sure most of you know. He is the general director of ELIAMEP, and the soul and body of ELIAMEP most of the times. And finally is one of the last but not least is one of the co-organizers of this event, Mr. Vasilis Trigkas, very soon to become Dr. Vasilis Trigkas, an Onassis scholar and research fellow at the Tsinghua Department of Political Sciences and International Relations, and I can confidently tell you, one of their brightest students as well. So, Dr. Zuokui, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Sorry that I have some problem with my throat, so I could not speak a little louder. And today I will present my speech on the 16+1 cooperation, also we call it the China and the Central and the East European cooperation framework. This framework is very complicated, but I try to clarify it within 50 minutes. Since it was launched in 2012, I have visited all the 16 Central and Eastern countries. Today I visited Greece, which means that I have visited all the 17 Central and Eastern and Balkan countries. So it's a really good experience for me to fully understand of this framework's function, performance. First, I would like to explain what is the China and the Central and East European cooperation. I try to talk with the students from the foundation. They just receive me at the hotel. I asked, do you know what is the 16+1 cooperation? He did not respond to me. And she did not respond to me and answered that maybe she didn't know this. And so today I must give a good publicity of this framework of the 16+1 cooperation. Now we call it the 17+1 cooperation. The China CEE cooperation was launched in 2012. It was consisted of several sections of this framework. One is the Leader Summit. From 2012 to today, we have held at least eight summits from Warsaw, Bucharest, Belgrade, Suzhou, Riga, Budapest, Sofia, Dubrovnik. In 2010, it will be held in my hometown, Liaoning province. So the governor has invited me to attend this summit and give some proposal. So I have recruited from him to be the advisor of our local government. And each summit will launch the guideline. It's become the leading document to promote China and Central and East European cooperation. The second part is the local municipality leaders meeting. And from 2013, we hold this local leaders meeting. And now in Chongqing, Prague, Hebei, Sofia, and Liaoning will hold the local leaders meeting. You can see that there is something like at the government level and the local level, we hold the conference. And the third section, we think that each year we have a priority task to promote China and the Central and the East European cooperation. And in 2014, we called the Trade and Investment Promotion Year, which means that we will took full advantage of our position to promote the trade and investment cooperation. And to 2015, we called it the Tourism Cooperation Year. 2016, we called People-to-People Exchange Year. And 2017, we called the Media Cooperation Year. And next, we called it the Agricultural Cooperation Year. And this year, we called the Education and Youth Exchange Year. Each year, we have a subject. We promote this areas cooperation. It's very interesting. And now we call it the basic framework of the China CE cooperation. On this, you can see that we have a summit, and as this, we have a local level cooperation. Also, we have built some special associations. On the next slide, we'll show how many special associations. Also, we have some national coordinator meeting and a special representative for China CE framework at the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's the basic framework of the China CEEC cooperation. And through this framework, we hold a summit, hold the annual meeting, hold the special association meeting, also promote some special cooperation with each other. And now you can see some special coordinating platform and institutions, which means that we know that the Central and the Eastern European countries are very, very diversified, which means that you could not use the same standard to promote the cooperation. You must take full advantage of their own advantage to promote this cooperation. This is the Chinese way to promote the specific cooperation. Now we have built at least 20 special platform, special institutions to promote this cooperation. Since time is limited, I would not disclose all the institution or platform. You can share my PowerPoint after my speech, and if you have any question, you can exchange with me through email or other way. And when we talk about the China CEE cooperation, different people have different explanation. And from a Chinese understanding, we think that at least there are 4 points to summarize the feature of the 16+1 cooperation or 17+1 cooperation. One is that it's an inclusive cooperation platform. Why we call it inclusive? Because any country who have the willingness to join, who want to promote, who want to benefit from this framework, they can join. Just before this year, Greece had joined, which shows that this platform is very, very inclusive. It's not an exclusive platform, it's an inclusive platform. The second point, I think that it's a mutual development and benefit framework, which means that it's a win-win cooperation framework. China will promote to the benefit to each other, not only for China, but also for our 17 Central and Eastern European and Balkan countries. The third point is, I think that it's a new approach to develop China-EU relations. Somebody may ask why we launched this China CE cooperation, because we think that on the Central and Eastern European division of the European Union, we have less cooperation with each other in the past 30 years. We want to develop this dimension to promote a comprehensive cooperation between China and the Central and Eastern countries. The third point, I think that it's an important mechanism to promote the Belt and Road Initiative. When we develop the ties with the Europe countries, we think that the 16+1 is the special platform to promote the Belt and Road Initiative between China and the European Union. And here I would like to use several simple words to explain the relationship between 16+1 cooperation and the Belt and Road Initiative, because I have a lot of friends in the Central and Eastern European embassies in China. It often said that the 16+1 cooperation are similar to the Belt and Road Initiative. Maybe in the future, the Belt and Road Initiative will replace the 16+1 cooperation. It's totally not right. And you can see our government's identification of the relationship between Tsinghua Cooperation and the Belt and Road Initiative. One is that the Tsinghua or the Central and the Eastern country is a connecting point to embrace Eurasia continent. We use the special position of Central and Eastern countries to promote the connectivity between China and Europe. The second point, we think that is Central and Eastern European countries are the entering point of the Belt and Road Initiative to enter into the European market. What does this mean? We think that if Chinese enterprises want to go to the European market, we must find the gateway. We think that the Central and the Eastern countries are the good road, good outlet, inlet to go into the European market. The third point, we think that Central and Eastern European countries are the testing point to promote the Belt and Road Initiative in European continent, because this market is open. It's a very emerging market. We can find some more opportunity and learn lessons and experience through investment in Central and Eastern countries, then further step into the bigger European market. Now, I would like to explain why Central and Eastern European countries are very important to the Belt and Road Initiative. You can see the map that when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative framework of the China-EU cooperation, we have two routes. One is called the Silk Road Economic Belt. The other is the 21st Maritime Silk Road. Both these routes are heavily rely on the position of Central and Eastern countries. For the Silk Road Economic Belt, we want to transport the goods from China to Europe. We must pass by the Central and Eastern European countries, such as Poland, Hungary, Baltic countries, or other Central and Eastern countries. So their position is very important for us. For the 21st Maritime Silk Road, we also relied heavily on the Balkan countries. You know the Hungary-Serbia railway, or also you know the Belarus port. Without this port, without this railway, we could not have the 21st Maritime Silk Road to connect China and Europe through the sea transportation. So you know that both these routes are they must pass by the Central and Eastern European countries. Next section, I would like to explain the achievement so far about the 16+1 or 17+1 cooperation. I have listed at least 6 points. One is the trade investment. What we call the trade investment, I think, is the main engine of the 16+1 cooperation. The second point is the infrastructure building and the industry capacity cooperation. This is also the main gripper of the 16+1 cooperation. The third point is called the new financial supporting instrument. This is the main guarantee of the 16+1 cooperation. Also, the fourth point is the special coordinating platform and the institutions. This is the main foundation for promote 16+1 cooperation. The fifth point is the booming local cooperation. This will be also the new drivers of the 16+1 cooperation. Last but not least is the emerging cooperation with the third parties. This is also called the win-win-win cooperation, which will be a symbolic of the 16+1 cooperation. This is the trade cooperation. Generally speaking, we think that the trade growth rate, if you compare to the West Europe and our older European market, the trade between China and CE are growing relatively rapidly, more rapid than the older European market. So this shows that the Central and the Eastern European market has its advantage. Also, you can see the investment cooperation. You can see this map that, especially from 2015, we can see a very rapid growth of China's investment in Central and Eastern countries. Now we just take example of our China investment in Balkan countries in your region. Balkan example, you can see that there are a lot of investment cases, which the amount of the investment has nearly 1 billion US dollars. Sorry. So I think the Balkan investment has shown a successful story for China investment in Central and Eastern European countries. Also, we also want to see that the new financial supporting instrument. On the last section, we talk a lot about the financing approach. In China, so far, we have at least 6 financing instruments to promote China CE cooperation. One is a 10 billion credit line, 2 is a China CE investment fund, 3rd is a 16% financial company, also the IIB and the Silk Road Fund and the China CE Bank Association. They have offered different amount to promote China CE cooperation. And some funds are very successful, but the other fund maybe not so successful, and it needed to perfect to promote the China CE cooperation. Also, we can see some booming local cooperation. Local municipality cooperation have its advantage. You know that I almost visited some each local municipality to promote China CE cooperation, such as Ningbo, Liaoning, Qingdao, and others. The local city has their own demand, have their own advantage. They can promote this framework from the local perspective. And the central government can promote from the highest level cooperation, but the local municipality can promote some people-to-people or local resource cooperation. These 2 tracks, we call the 2 wheels engine. You know, 2-track engine. One is the central, one is the local. So it's a very successful cooperation among China. Now you can see that the local meeting, this mechanism is built in Czech Republic. And each year we will hold the capital governors meeting. And through this meeting, we have built the China-Europe Express. Now we have at least 56 local municipality in China to open the China-Europe Express towards Central and Eastern European countries. So it's a very successful try. Also, we have built some sister cities or friendship cities with Central and Eastern European countries. Until 2018, we have built 162 sister cities with Central and Eastern European countries. Also, there are some typical cities, such as Ningbo. They have made a very successful advancement to cooperation with Central and Eastern European countries. Also, the third party cooperation. Now, Greece has become the full member. Before that, you are the most important third party to join 16+1 cooperation, such as the China-Europe Land and Sea Express. Greece is a very important third party to join this connectivity. Also, we can see the Belarus, EBRD, Switzerland, Austria. They are the most important stakeholders to promote the China-CE cooperation. Last but not least, I would like to make an analysis on the problems and the challenge ahead. One is the trade deficit. And all the Central and Eastern European countries have shown the different trade deficit with China. We try to solve this problem, but in the short term, it's very difficult to elevate it. The second point is that the Central and Eastern countries are too diversified, too complicated. So if you want to meet all the countries' demand, it's also very difficult. So we also find an approach to solve it, but it's also very difficult. The third point, I think that our investment in Central and East European countries is still hold very small share of the China investment in Europe or China investment in the BRI neighboring countries. Here we have the characteristics. Generally speaking, we think that the Central and East European market size is too small. The fourth point, we think that the 16+1 cooperation will not include geopolitical factors. But now, maybe you think that we hear a lot of analysis from a geopolitical or geo-economical perspective in the morning or in the afternoon. They try to say that these geopolitical or geo-economic influence are very, very strong. So we don't want to invite this factor to the framework, but you could not deal with properly because the geopolitical situation exists. You should not neglect it. How to deal with, especially the China-US trade dispute, how to deal with it, because the China-EU-US relation will influence seriously of the China-CEE cooperation. And the fifth point is about the security factors. The 16+1 framework will not include the security cooperation. This is our starting point to promote the cooperation. But some countries, such as Poland, such as the Baltic countries, they think that China must consider the country's security concern from Russia. They want China to persuade Russia not to pose any security challenge towards this country. But we don't want to infer in these affairs. And on each discussion on the guidelines, the Poland or Baltic country have issued this problem, such as the Eastern Partnership. And China want to talk about it, but we could not dissuade Poland and the Baltic countries to talk about this security issue. So this is also a challenge for us. The last but not least is that how to deal with the relation among stakeholders, especially the EU, the concern and the doubt about the 16+ cooperation, or US, the willingness to persuade some Central and Eastern countries to cooperate with USA on the 5G problems or other regional issues. This is also a very important challenge for this 16+1 cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zuokui, for an excellent presentation, most informative and enlightening. Some of the challenges that you have highlighted are also very important, especially about connections and linkages, not just between places and people, but also the whole issue of trade and investment and surpluses, as Keynes taught us once upon a time. And I'm glad that you touched on the issue of Chinese surpluses. A surplus is as bad a thing as a deficit. Unfortunately, there is a country in the EU that thinks that that's not the case. But I'm glad to hear from a leading Chinese scholar that surpluses can stand on the way of harmonious trade relationships. The next speaker is Dr. Thanos Dokos, who will speak on Greece and China security and prosperity providers in the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean. Thanos.
Well, I would like to thank, first of all, the organizers for the invitation and compliment both the Laskaridis Foundation and Admiral Mazarakis for organizing this event, and I will come back to this at the very end of my comments. There's a slight problem in the title of my presentation. The prosperity part is fine. Everyone likes prosperity. But when it comes to security, it's a bit more complicated because at a time where we are trying to prevent the securitization of relations between China and the EU, talking about a Chinese security contribution in the Balkans and the Eastern Med, it's a bit more sensitive, and I'll have to treat lightly there. So the question is, can Greece and China and Greece work together and make a contribution in stabilizing those two turbulent regions? And what would be the format of such a cooperation, of such a partnership? Well, obviously, the answer is neither obvious nor straightforward. It's not a simple yes or no. But before I try to answer that question, allow me to say a few words or describe briefly the security environment and the security challenges in those two regions. Starting with the Eastern Mediterranean, a Western lake in the minds of many analysts. In the 90s, early 2000s, now it looks much more like a multi-polar, multi-actor region. And the general picture is quite bleak. There's a general failure of governance as the Eastern Mediterranean and its adjoining regions remain an extremely turbulent and unstable neighborhood, and the security environment continues to be Hobbesian. There's a long list of frequently interacting security problems, including civil conflicts, the emergence of fragile, unstable, dysfunctional, or even failed states, the possibility of de facto or even de jure border change in various parts of the region, the role of political Islam and sectarian tensions, jihadist terrorism, extreme inequality in the distribution of income, democratic deficit, population flows, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, as well as small arms and light weapons, existing regional conflicts, the ambitious agendas of regional powers, including Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, competition for energy resources, the lack of a regional security architecture, a relative decline in US interest and presence in the region, and a deep structural European crisis also affecting the EU's global and regional influence and policies. And all those factors combine to cause an almost perfect storm in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Now, the region is also being transformed by global trends, or the so-called megatrends, and drivers such as the emergence of non-Western powers and the shifting global balance of power, demographic changes, technological developments, globalization, and climate change. And the transformation of the Arab world over the past few years has also contributed to the weakening of state structures and to the creation of ungoverned territories in places like Sinai, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and elsewhere that can be exploited by hybrid actors. Now, moving to the Balkans, then we have a different set of problems and security challenges. Inconclusive state-building processes and state fragility in countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and Kosovo, in combination with the burden of history, both older and more recent, the rise of strong personalities and semi-authoritarian governments which challenge key principles such as rule of law, accountability and governance, and the freedom of the press. The growing apathy and disillusionment of the citizens with political elites in the face of rampant unemployment, matched with party favoritism, the negative role of local elites, the so-called stabilitocrats, and increasing inequality also contribute to fragility. And of course, there is limited economic development. Some economists suggest that the region is, in terms of economic development, where it was in the early 2000s, meaning almost 2 decades lost. Then dealing with organized crime and corruption constitutes important challenges for several countries in the Balkans, including EU members in the region. And the nexus between organized crime, including trafficking of refugees or migrants, corruption, terrorism, and radicalization, is a complex threat for law enforcement agencies to deal with. Then, of course, one cannot ignore population of movements. The Balkan route was one of the main entry points for Europe. That has changed to an extent, but the problem is still there. And of course, radicalization concerns. There are more than 1,000 foreign fighters from Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Albania, and North Macedonia that fought with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Most of them have returned home, but that's not something to rejoice about. Now, the phenomenon in the Balkans has slightly different causes than in parts of the Arab world or in Russia. Can also be explained by limited economic opportunities that made young people seeking other alternatives offered by recruiters of religious and political extremism, but the problem is there. Radicalization is an issue. So this is the kind of regions we are talking about. What kind of contribution could Greece and China make? Let me start with Greece. The smaller of the two potential partners. But of course, as the economist Schumacher said, small is also beautiful. Well, obviously, under the current circumstances, Greece cannot make an economic contribution. It can try to make a contribution in terms of security and stability. Now, as far as its geopolitical role, Greece is well positioned in the Balkans. The name issue has been removed from the list, and the hope is that the benefits will outweigh the costs. And it has reasonably good relations with various players in the region, both Serbia on the one hand, and also Albanians, especially Kosovo Albanians on the other. Then, when it comes to the Eastern Med, I mentioned the lack of regional security architecture, which is a main problem for the region. But the only game in town are those tripartite or trilateral strategic partnerships between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. And these have good prospects both for enlargement and for deepening. And the US is, of course, interested in joining somehow those partnerships. Additionally, Greece is an acceptable interlocutor for all kinds of difficult actors. Greece is part of the EU, NATO, a close strategic ally of the US, and at the same time, we have open channels of communication with Russia, China, Iran, and both Israel and the Arab countries. And Greece is an acceptable venue for meetings, including sensitive ones, or could become such a venue. Now, not all is rosy and well, of course. There are some constraints. Greece is, and that's an important part of its foreign policy. Greece is a member of the EU, NATO, a close ally of the US. That, of course, imposes a number of constraints. At a time when, as several speakers have mentioned in those 2 days, there's increasing suspicion, lack of trust between, especially on the EU side, about a possible hidden agenda when it comes to China's policies, both in the Eastern Med and the Balkans, but also when it comes to investing in critical infrastructure in EU countries. And Greece is the recipient of complaints and criticisms from its EU partners about breaking the common position when it comes to China on issues like human rights. And this is something that we need to take seriously into account. The same factors, of course, apply in the case of Greece's relations with another difficult neighbor of Europe, Russia. Now, of course, this is a slightly different case because of history, geography, geopolitical, geoeconomic reasons, especially energy, so the interaction there is quite different. But it shows that being part of organizations can be both a source of power and influence, but it imposes a number of constraints in terms of foreign policy. Now, these are not unsurmountable. I'm a strong believer in multi-directional diplomacy, of course, within certain limits and putting priorities. Now, what about China? China is a newcomer in both the Balkans and the Mediterranean, which can be a positive thing. China, like Greece, doesn't carry any historical luggage, no colonial past, no other problems of that sort in a region which, of course, it has been often said about the Balkans, it applies to the Middle East and the Mediterranean as well. We tend to produce more history than we can actually consume. So that's a good thing. And China has an ambitious geoeconomic agenda and, of course, has the money to back up that ambition. Those are the good news. The problem is which I alluded to before, China's image is slightly controversial. There is concern more in the US, but also in some circles in Europe, that there is a hidden agenda, that there's a political agenda behind the economic one. And I'm not saying that this is the case, but here the relationship could benefit from a very open and frank dialogue. And we need more transparency, better understanding between the two sides, meaning the EU and China. So trying to answer the question, and I'm afraid we are at a very early stage of that debate, but I think it would be too early and it would take too much effort and time, which I'm sure China would be up to the task, but to become an actor in regional conflict resolution efforts. And that would also cause reactions by existing players like the Americans. But it can certainly become an important player in economic development and especially in post-conflict reconstruction. It was mentioned in other panels that China has an interest. Obviously, it has the money, and the need is there. The most obvious example would be Syria. One hopes that there will be an end to this conflict and there will be a day after. And of course, however difficult a diplomatic solution might look, the economic reconstruction of such a country would be a much more difficult task, and huge amounts of money would be necessary. And we don't have many obvious candidates. Now, if China is willing to be a major player in such reconstruction efforts, could Greece make a contribution? Greece, let me emphasize that, would be an acceptable interlocutor. It can add credibility in such efforts and also has local knowledge, which China is lacking at this stage. Of course, my understanding, my limited knowledge of Chinese culture is that China is a serious player. It invests in education and knowledge and will eventually produce the necessary results. But for the time being, since China is a newcomer in this region, this would be Greece's added value, that we know the local players, we understand the dynamics, we have been here for a long time. Sometimes as part of the problems, we try to become part of the solution, not always succeeding, of course. That looks in the long term like a natural partnership. But of course, many more steps would be necessary. So let me end with a couple of, not policy recommendations, but suggestions. First of all, we need a learning process, either between Greece and China or between China and the EU. We need to better understand each other. What are the concerns? What are the objectives? Talk about methods where we may have different understandings and different tactics. And we need, I think, a structured strategic dialogue at various levels that would involve, of course, universities, think tanks, but also other actors. And it is a process that will take time because there are many differences between our two countries, or, if you like, our two continents. That's not necessarily a problem or a disadvantage, but it's a factor that needs to be taken into account. So one should have reasonable and realistic expectations. One should be patient. Let me also borrow some expressions we heard during those 2 days of discussions. Emphasize win-win situations over a zero-sum game. Avoid a Cold War mentality in relations between Europe and the West in general and China. Try to develop cooperation between two ancient civilizations. Overall, I think the prospects for a profitable partnership between China and Greece are good in the long term. But of course, again, let me emphasize that should be pragmatic and realistic in the expectations. And let me finish, as I mentioned, need for strategic dialogue. The event organized by the Laskaridis Foundation is a very important contribution. This is the kind of dialogues we need to have as often as possible in an effort to better understand each other's positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thanos, for a most instructive presentation. Two things that I will take home, which is quite far away from Athens, is that China has all the self-interest in the world to be a multilateralist. A foreign diplomat, either here or somewhere else, asked me, but China is the chief bilateralist. Why do you speak about a new multilateralism? Because exactly as you said, the scenery is Hobbesian, the landscape is Hobbesian, and the only way to turn the zero-sum game into cooperation games in game theory and maximize returns, which means incentives and self-interest, is to become an active player in multilateralism, including conflict resolution. The other thing that I want to stress from your presentation is, of course, people of my generation, even more the generation before, or the baby boomers, a couple of generations before mine, thought in this idea of perennial growth. And here we are today that the Balkan region is, in terms of growth, prosperity, GDP, where it was in the 2000s. What's the solution? Well, the solution is that in the second half of the 19th century, all railways, all freight, all trade was going through Thessaloniki. Okay, within a unified empire, but that we can rebuild. And none of the Balkan states has the money for that. And for that reason, the BRI in the Balkans has a major, or can have a major geostrategic impact and become a key peace builder. And I don't think we should lose that opportunity, because the obvious question, and I will ask that during the Q&A, is how much Greece's security constraints and treaties in which Greece and multilateral organization in which Greece is a member, and has served Greece very, very well in the past 70 years. They stabilized the country, will act as a brake, as a constraint in terms of full engagement with BRI projects. But that's for Q&A. The next speaker is Mr. Vasilis Trigkas, who will, from Tsinghua, who will speak about Greece and China, a non-hegemonic superstructure of regional infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Emilios. I'll take it from here. Let me thank you again for your overwhelming, kindly comments at the beginning. I don't deserve them. I'm always in the process of learning from you. So today, let me just say that we have here CAS, which for those who do not know, CAS, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, is a think tank of the government. And I thought the last panel would be more kind of practical. How could we really operationalize our relationship with China? So yesterday, Dr. Liu asked me a question while we were in the cab going to IDIS, the Institute of International Relations at Pandion University. And he said, I read a speech by your Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said that Greece is a leader in the Balkans. And he said, do the other Prime Ministers, the other head of states in the Balkans have read the speech, right? Do they agree that Greece can be a natural leader in the Balkans? And I said, well, perhaps that speech was in Greek, because in practice, we share leadership here as the Chinese do within the party, right? And the reason why we share leadership in the Balkans is because for the past 100 years, the Balkans have been the power keg of Europe, of the world. I mean, World War I started here, and World War II also took place in the Balkans, the Balkan Front. So the non-hegemonic aspect of the BRI is one that I really want to underline here. What does non-hegemonic mean? If we want to go back to the primary sources, the Greek texts, the original term hegemony was leadership. Hegemony was leadership, was not imperium. Okay? So Thucydides talked about how Athens shifted from hegemony to archi. Archi was the negative imperial dimension of the Athenian Empire. Hegemony was the positive dimension of providing public goods to the Athenian allies. So my understanding of the 17+1 is that is more on the leadership dimension rather than on the archi, on the imperial dimension of history, right? Because it's open, it's flexible, but its flexibility, its plasticity will be determined by the ideas of people in this room, of the Greeks, of the Balkans, who they can reach out to the Chinese and come up with valid projects that are positive sum related to both sides, right? So, let me ask you a question. How many of you are aware of more than 2 Chinese dynasties? Professor Platias is not allowed to talk, or the panelists.
I think I know 3.
Okay.
But that's about
right.
Ming
All right. The easy ones, right?
That's right.
Homophone. Okay. So, how many are aware of, let's say, the top 3 Chinese companies in the world? Do you know the names? Top 3. Not just Alibaba. Not just the... Okay, we have some. Okay. How many are aware of the oldest university in Asia? The name of the oldest university in Asia, which is as old as the Platonic Academy? Well, Beta it wishes to be. It's the Jixia Academy in Shandong province. Is as old, actually it was established just like 10 years before the Platonic Academy in Athens, right? Now, why am I asking all those questions? I have no incentive to insult you. You're always bright and brilliant, and you're here so you understand there's a strategic imperative to know China. But that's the thing. If we want to operationalize the initiative in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, we need to be able to understand Chinese history, right? Chinese mindset, Chinese culture. So I want to thank the Laskaridis Foundation and Admiral Mazarakis again for really setting this panel together, for spending time, effort, and money to support the research of Chinese students in China, in Greece, and also ask from the Greek side to engage in a learning process with the Chinese. Go to China, study in China. I moved to Tsinghua University in 2012. I had not much understanding of China apart from some classical books of the Chinese civilization. And in just 5 years, I saw the world changing. I saw, let's say, a middle-income, poor country, 2012, going from cash to totally cashless. I went to New York 2016, 15. I went back to China. The Chinese were cashless. They've never been using cash since 2016, 17. We've been talking about 5G and telecommunications. When I went to China, Huawei was relatively good, but they had no leadership in the 5G. 5 years later, the world is talking about Huawei, a Chinese company, monopolizing 5th-generation telecommunication networks, which is basically, 5th-generation 5G is basically the infrastructure of the 4th revolution. Right? So again, let me sum up by asking a question to Professor Liu. What do you really expect from the Greeks, from the Greek side? How can we take this project, which, as I said, is a leadership project, is based on a non-hegemonic dimension, at least for now, right? And turn it into hardcore operational projects where our Greek friends, and I would say the youth of this nation, the millennials, who are those who have been impacted the most by 10 years of erroneous fiscal contraction, by 10 years of mistaken policies which they were really imposed on this state by, I would say, the archy of Germany, or of a centralized authority which lacks legitimacy to decide about the policies of this country. So what would the Chinese expect from the Greeks? I will be very specific, projects, ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vasilis, for a provocative set of questions. I might use it next time as well to avoid having to prepare a presentation. Who said that you cannot teach new tricks to an old dog? The old dog is me. I will now open the floor to discussion, and probably we'll gather a first round of questions, 2 or 3 questions, and then come back to the floor for more. Do we have a mic? No. We do. So could you please circulate the mic? Thank you. So the first question, the gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Vasilis Trafalis. I'm from the Academy of Strategic Analysis. First, one question and one proposal, but first a small notice. Probably there was a small error in the table of Dr. Zuokui. In some tables there was a country called Macedonia. Obviously, it's North Macedonia. So the question is about the elephant in the room, and I think the elephant in the room, or one of the elephants in the room, is Turkey. 2 questions about that, and concerning China. The good aspect and the bad aspect. The good aspect is, what about the Islamic minority of Uyghurs in China, where Turkey is in favor of them? And we have problems, the same problems with China. Turkey exploiting Islamic minorities in China and in Greece. So we share the same problems with China. I want an answer about that. And the second is the bad aspect, where they disagree. What about the economic zone in the sea? There it's completely opposite. China has the position of Turkey, Greece has the opposite position. This was the question about Turkey. And one big proposal, I had a dilemma if I express it here, but now, after this fantastic forum that was organized by Admiral Mazarakis and Vasilis, and thank you very much, it's not big word, it's not flattering. The proposal I want to express here, probably for first time, is the establishment of world ancient civilization, East-West civilization, ancient civilization center or forum that will be included 4 major civilizations, ancient civilizations. From West, Greek and Jewish, who are the pillars of the Western civilizations, and from East, the Chinese and Indian civilizations. That's, there is a lot of discuss about that if someone is interested. A detail is that probably you can have as observers Italy expressing the Roman aspect and Egypt from the Eastern. But there is a problem because they now have Islam. This center or forum has 3 dimensions. One is that the common civilization. The second is the technology, because all these 4 players are #1 in technology and startups. China, India, Israel, and probably Greece will be. And the third is the security dimension, which is not so easy to discuss, because everyone can think in this room that all these 4 nations have the same problem. You can imagine what problem I mean. Thank you very much.
Next question. Can we take another question? Complete the first round. There is a hand over there. There is a raised hand, gentleman over there. No? You're just holding your pen. The gentleman over here in the second row, please.
Thank you. My name is Angelo Dendrinos. I'm a cultural manager and museologist. I would like to have more details about the cultural aspect of the BRI. Thank you.
Okay, I think now it's it's time for our speakers to answer the questions. We'll start with Dr. Zuokui and then Thanos and Vasilis if they want to interject. Dr. Zuokui.
Before I answer the question on the Turkish Islamic, I want to ask the question from our friend Vasilis. Our China's expectation towards Greece. We think that if you want to do this work wonderfully, you must have a lot of the foundation. I think how to pronounce the last carries the foundation. You must send some elite to China. We must send the elite to Greece. I strongly believe some elite-driven process that only elite could change the situation. Now we have one Vasilis. If we have 2, 3 or more, I think this will be change the situation a lot. When we talk about Italy, you know that Italy has a deputy minister of development. He once studied in China. After he returned to Italy, he promotes the China-Italy cooperation. So only one elite to persuade his cabinet to change the situation. So we need the elite-driven process, elite-driven cooperation. How to deal with it? We need the foundation, we need the NGO, need other to promote that. So here we thank you very much for that carry the foundation, the contribution to have such excellent students in China. What it is. For the question, I think this is also a very complicated question. Maybe I could only answer part of your concerns. For China-Turkish relations, I think the Islam is a very important, a big trouble among between this bilateral cooperation. At the government level, we want to reach some consensus. But maybe you know that in 2019, Erdogan has sent his complaint to China's the activity towards Islamic. So among this, we have lack some mutual consensus, have some common consensus with each other. But when you talk about Macedonia, I think it's not a problem. I once visited Macedonia. North Macedonia. Sorry, this mistake. That I also met some Islamic. I also eat the food in the Islamic community, because you know that in the North Macedonia, in the capital, they are separate, and the Macedonia Islamic are lived in a mountain, near the mountain. I once visit and eat the food. I think that the North Macedonia Islamic is not a problem of China-Macedonia cooperation. They didn't send any objection to our policy toward the Islamic. So maybe in the history we have problem with North Macedonia on the Taiwan issues, but we have deal with this problem very properly. But for the Islamic, I think it's not a problem. Macedonia, the inhabitant with the Islamic background, will not pose any trouble to the bilateral cooperation. It's only a question between China and Turkey on the Islamics. Maybe it's the answer you need. Thank you.
Thanos or Vasilis?
I don't. The ancient civilizations idea has a lot of merit, but although I'm not in the habit of advertising former Minister Kogias's initiatives, I must say he created a form of ancient civilizations which, of course, is broader than the one you suggested. It includes, I think, Mexico, Guatemala, and Bolivia. Sorry, yes. But taking that a step further and promoting cooperation in specific fields might be of interest to the countries involved.
Let me just say very quickly. So think of a practical project, the fraternization between the Platonic Academy and the GCA Academy. I mean, Oxford is a great university, but not the most ancient university in the world. It was GCA, it was a Platonic Academy. So can you imagine Greek and Chinese working together in really operationalizing such a project? The symbolism. No other nations have this, right? So on the dialogue of civilization, you have to remember that the Greek president will be the only Caucasian, Westerner, that has been invited to address the summit next week. So there is an appreciation. I felt that in China. When you talk with the Chinese, the first thing he asks you, are you an American, are you British, are you a French? And after you say you're a Greek, his whole body language becomes friendlier, right? Because there's a trust. You're not an enemy, you're not a threat. And in the big questions of humanity, the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, and the Chinese philosophers walked parallel lines, right? They address the same humanistic questions that we have been addressing since time immemorial. And they gave certain answers with a certain degree of similarity, but also a little bit of differences in some cases. But the thing is that at the same time, that's why it's parallel lines, the so-called axial age. The big civilizations, they've never contacted each other, but they reach to similar conclusions. So think of really practical project, and I would say, if you have ideas, why don't you engage with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and try to inspire them, advise them on how to build really structured projects on cultural partnership, right?
I would just like to add that when it comes to the threat of Islamic terrorism, China is a stabilizing force globally. And because of the emerging rivalry between the United States and China, this is not fully recognized. If you were one of the parents who lost their children in the Sri Lanka bomb attacks, you wouldn't be that concerned about proportionality. And unlike the United States, China is on the right side of history in this context, in this concern, because it's not just a policy of confinement, it's also a policy of full engagement. 3/4 of the populations in the Eurasian plateau that I showed in my presentation are Islamic, are Muslim. Economic cooperation, economic development, social development is the answer to the problems that Islamic societies face. And these are multifaceted problems, problem of education, of exclusion of women. It's problems of going back to basics, because Jordan is an example. Jordan has always been one of the most liberal Arabic societies in the world. Look at Jordan today. Why? Economic insecurity. Some of the challenges that the BRI will, or at least is trying to address, and perhaps will successfully resolve. Next round of questions. No questions? How is that possible? We are Greeks. Yes.
May I just, Mr. Kolyas, because I know you've been doing business with the Chinese, so if you could share your perspective on how you engage on high technology, you're doing renewable energy, and you're trying to build a joint research center with the Chinese in Greece. So what are the problems? How do you work with them?
I have thought about respecting your Saturday afternoon, but you provoked me. I'm Dimitris Kolyas. I'm in a company that is doing energy projects, that it's a subsidiary of a public power company in Greece. We have been working with major Chinese companies, state-owned since 2015. Trying to implement energy projects in Greece. So we have major deals with Sinomac, with CETC, and such kind of companies. Our vision is not only exploiting energy projects in Greece along with major Chinese companies, but to build infrastructure projects in Greece, and also to build big factories in Greece, starting from small factories, that will try to bring back industrialization back in Greece. So we're working on a project with some major Chinese companies to import some equipment from China and try to make them as European products in Greece. So in order to use them in all over European countries. So to have all the overvalue of this project. This is something we're on to, and this is why we're seeing with a lot of, we're very optimistic about the 17+1 project in Greece, and we hope that we'll try to do everything in the best possible way and try to turn every kind of problem, to see every kind of problem as something that is real and find the pragmatic way to find solutions.
So Greece has a human capital for that?
Yes, we definitely have a human capital. We have so much human capital that we're exporting human capital. We're trying to keep our going from brain drain that we have heard too many times about it, to brain gain, brain regain, brain come back to our country. Of course, with taking under consideration that we have to give all kind of our effort to implement good jobs with prosperity.
Let me just add on that, if I may, Emilios, that there was a project in Serbia, maybe Professor Liu knows better, in Serbia, where there was a steel industry which was in decline. There was a steel firm, manufacturing capacity, it was going down, but then a Chinese company intervened and they had a joint venture, and that many jobs were saved in Serbia. Not sure if you know the exact story.
Or some green investment, not only in the industrial capacity, but also for some direct investment. For the Shandong Hegang Semi-Dairy investment in Semi-Dairy, we have created 5,000 jobs for this investment. Also save a bankrupt factory and to get the benefit only the first year. So I think this we have a lot of such successful story in Serbia, and maybe I think through collecting this successful experience, we want to broaden this investment in Greece and just make our company didn't pay so many tuition and to promote so many good investment in Greece. Thank you. Yeah.
Have any more questions? Questions? No. It's Saturday afternoon. Yes, Thanos.
I think it was Professor Platias who mentioned yesterday or this morning one of the latest books by Harvard professor Graham Allison about the Thucydides trap. And I think that relationship between the US and China, or if you like, more broadly, the West and China, will define the international system for the rest of this century. And there's a long list of issues which we need to address, including climate change, globalization, management of global commons, the role of the UN Security Council and the responsibility to protect, and so on and so forth. And there are broad differences on many of those issues, but I think it would be a pity if we don't manage at the end to avoid Thucydides trap and go to conflict, to war, because of lack of understanding. So dialogue is important. Of course, the problem is political time has compressed so much, and those dialogue processes take much longer. And of course, there's no guarantee that they will actually help us prevent a conflict or solve the problem, but then what else do we have?
Just, if I may, a very quick follow-up on the Thucydides trap. There's also the Kindleberger trap, which is the other way. It's that if you have a rising hegemon that doesn't do too much to replace the falling responsibilities of the ruling hegemon, then you have a problem of global governance, right? So on the one hand, you have the United States lecturing China that they are doing too many things aggressively, right? But on the other hand, if China doesn't help in reforming the global governance system, supporting more subsidies for growth and endowments for infrastructure and shows environmental responsibility, then we have the other trap, which is there will be no public goods. And without public goods, you would have Islamic fundamentalism, you would have extremist groups rising faster, right? So the third trap is a geopolitical. The Kindleberger trap is the issue of global governance. And I think here China has been doing a lot since 2012, the going out approach, the Belt and Road Initiative. These are all engagements that try to resolve the Kindleberger trap. Thank you.
As a shown multilateralist myself, before I declare the end of the proceedings for this panel, I should say that I do not share the current pessimism. There have been two critical moments in recent history where both China and the United States played their role. Nobody is mentioning them for obvious reasons. In 2008, when the floor fell from the global financial system and the global economy, China was there to consume, to import, and keep the Western economies afloat. Now, there is somebody who says the United States saved Europe 4 times, not just the First World War, the Second World War, and the Cold War. The 4th time was in December 2011, when nobody was lending money to European banks, to Eurozone banks. Of course, they were bankrupt. And they couldn't roll over their $500 billion liabilities, short-term loans in US dollars. And the US Federal Reserve opened their swap lines with the European Central Bank. They accepted euros. They lent to the European Central Bank. They exchanged, they swapped dollars. The European Central Bank, acting as a lender of last resort, of course in its own currency, but now it had $500 billion to distribute around, helped the European banking system, or rather saved the European banking system from default. We shouldn't forget that. These are two very instructive incidents which both hegemons, the incumbent and the rising hegemon, played a very strong historical role, a very strong beneficial role for humanity, even though it's not widely reported. So I fear when push comes to the shove and perhaps rhetoric is toned down, the two countries will try again to find ways to cooperate. And on that more optimistic than usual note, I'd like to close the proceedings of the panel and thank very much our 3 speakers.
In the persons of this panel, I want to thank very much all the panelists of the 2 days, to give my warm congratulations to you who are heroes, being in here instead of outside in the sun. So let's go outside.